Today's video is going to deal with leaf morphology and anatomy. A leaf is essentially a photosynthetic organ of a plant. It's actually the primary photosynthetic organ, but not exclusively a photosynthetic organ. Other parts of the plant can also play a role in photosynthesis. For example, the stem can be green and function in that role. The leaf is also directly attached to the vascular system of plants and is critical in helping with the movement of water and nutrients up from the roots by providing a kind of negative pressure through evapotranspiration. So transpiration or loss of water, evapotranspiration or loss of water from the leaf surface will draw more water up from the roots. So it's a critical part of a plant. We're going to look today at morphology, but also anatomy of leaves. Morphology is the external structure of the leaves, and anatomy is the internal structure of the leaf. So in other words, it's mechanics. There are two kinds of leaves. There are simple leaves and compound leaves. First, we're going to deal with the simple leaf structure. The simple leaf structure is basically a single blade or lamina. You can see I've labeled all the parts of the plant. You have a main stem or plant stem from which the leaves are derived. There is a leaf stalk or petiole which attaches it to the stem. There's usually an axillary bud at the axis of the stem and the leaf stalk. The leaf stalk extends into the main vein or midrib of the leaf, and that main vein supplies the lateral veins that transport water and nutrients to various parts of the leaf, and then food from the leaf once it's produced by photosynthesis. So, and by food I mean carbohydrates, which are produced by photosynthesis. You have a leaf apex or tip, and that's essentially a simple leaf. And as the name suggests, simple is the most basic or straightforward kind of leaf. There are some unusual leaf types. Some leaves may be scale-like, and that's very common in cedars. For example, the Atlantic white cedar or the Eastern red cedar. And then a lot of leaves might be needle-like. This is typical of pine trees, firs, and spruces. The firs and spruces have much shorter spiny-like leaves. Pine trees usually have much longer leaves, as pictured in the right. So the compound leaf is a more complex leaf. Essentially what it is a leaf that has been divided up into leaflets. So if you look at this picture here, this is a single leaf which has been divided into a number of leaflets. It has the leaf stalk or petiole at the base, the center rachis, which is the extension of the petiole where the leaves are attached. In this case there is a winged rachis. In other words, there are leaf-like extensions from the rachis, and then you have these little leaflets called pinna, or singular, and pinnae is the plural for it, and there's a terminal leaflet on this particular compound leaf. So that's essentially a compound leaf. It's a leaf that's been divided into small little leaflets. There are different kinds of compound leaves, and they may be divided once or twice. On the left hand side you can see it's been divided once. It's pinnately compound. You can see individual pinnae on the leaf, and I've circled in yellow the single leaf compound leaf. Okay, so it's been divided once. In the picture on the right, it's been divided twice. So you have the main leaf stalk or petiole leading into the rachis. Then you look to the left or right, and you'll see that there's or up and down in this picture, you'll see the individual leaf, which is further again divided into leaflets. So the individual leaf which would be called a pinna, and then the little leaflets on the side which would be called pinnules. Also with compound leaves, especially in terminology, in terms of the identification of leaf types, one would refer to as a compound leaf being paripinnate or imparipinnate. Imparipinnate basically means that there is a terminal leaflet on the compound leaf, whereas paripinnate means there are two leaflets at the tip of the compound leaf. There are other kinds of compound leaves. These are more complex or unusual. You might have a trifoliate or trifoliolate leaf, for example, this clover. In other words, there are 3 leaflets coming from a single point. You might have a palmately compound leaf. On the right top picture, you can see a leaf, compound leaf, which has 5 leaflets coming from a single point, and that's actually from a buckeye, painted buckeye. Other compound leaves might only be divided twice. So yeah, we have a bifoliate leaf in the case of a mopani leaf, which comes from Africa on the bottom left. And then some leaves might actually appear to be compound, but are not actually compound leaves. For example, the leaf on the bottom right-hand image is from a bauhinia, and it's a leaf that's basically deeply parted or lobed, but it's still a single leaf. It's still considered a single obcordate leaf. Sometimes compound leaves may be divided a second or even a third time. Okay, if it's divided a third time, it is tripinnately divided. In this image, you can see various levels of division. If you look at the yellow circle, you'll see it resembles a regular compound leaf that's been once pinnately divided. Okay, you'll see the individual leaflets there, and it would be terminally, it has a terminal leaflet and would be considered imparipinnate. Okay, if you move down the stem or rachis, and you'll see in the green circle, you have leaves that have been divided a second time, and the sort of upper or left hand side leaves are actually trifoliate, and the others are just pinnately divided. Okay, so that's the second division. And then if you move down to the blue circle, you'll see that lower down on the on the leaflet stem, there will be little trifoliate leaflets derived from the pinnules, or secondly divided leaflets. So this is an example of a heavenly bamboo plant called Nandina domestica, and you can see all kinds of divisions in this leaflet, in this leaf, this compound leaf. Simple leaves. There are many different kinds of simple leaves. They may be entire or undivided, which is what we typically are familiar with in terms of simple leaves. They might be deeply lobed or deeply divided, as in the picture on the top right. They might be palmately lobed and deeply dissected, as in the pictures on the bottom. So there's a geranium leaf, geranium leaflets on the left-hand lower picture, and you can see they kind of come from a single point, almost like the palm of a hand, spreading out. And then there's a May apple, which shows the same kind of structure. Leaf shapes. There are a lot of different leaf shapes, and they can be very confusing. There are many more actually than the ones pictured here, but these are the primary kinds of leaf shapes. You might have a linear leaf shape. That's usually a leaf that's got relatively parallel sides and is very long and thin. A lanceolate leaf kind of broadens, is a long and thin leaf. It broadens towards the center and then narrows again to the point. An oblanceolate leaf typically is kind of the opposite of a lanceolate leaf. It's broader towards the tip than the base, so it's kind of in the opposite direction. The prefix ob in a lot of these, like obovate, oblanceolate, is basically saying the opposite of whatever the other option is. So if it's an ovate leaf and you have an obovate leaf, then it's got the opposite shape. So in the two right hand images on the top of the diagram here, you've got an ovate leaf on the right, which has a broad base and it narrows to the tip, and obovate would be a broader tip narrowing to the base. Then on the left middle picture, you have reniform, which is a kidney shaped leaf, cordate, which is a heart shaped leaf. Cordate means heart shaped. Orbicular, this is a trillium with 3 rounded, very rounded leaves. Deltoid, which is triangular, so any leaf that looks triangular, as in these cottonwoods. Acicular, which is the typical needle-like leaf of pine trees. Oblong is a leaf that's kind of long and broad, evenly broad across virtually its entire length. Elliptical is broad towards the center and narrowing towards the base and tip. Rhombic is diamond shaped. So you can see it kind of forms a diamond shape in this image. Spatulate is spoon shaped, so the leaf broadens towards the tip almost like a spoon. Sagittate is arrow shaped, and you can see in this image here, this is one of the aquatic plants, and you can see the tip of the leaf is pointed like an arrow, and then the two bases are kind of like the base of an arrow. Then obcordate is the bauhinia, which I've spoken about before. It's a leaf that's divided at the top. It's heart-shaped. It's the opposite of cordate. So in a cordate leaf, you have the two lobes of the heart at the base of the leaf. In this case, you have the two lobes at the tip of the leaf. Leaf tips. Here again, you have a whole range of possibilities. An acute tip is basically a fairly sharp tip to a leaf, but no extensions from it. A cirrose tip is a tip that is typically used for climbing. This is from a Gloriosa superba, which is an African flame lily, and typically there are tendril-like tips to the leaf. Obtuse is a kind of rounded tip. Apiculate is a tip that narrows to a point. Emarginate means there's no tip, it kind of dips in at the tip. Rounded is, as the name suggests, a rounded tip, and in this case nasturtiums. Subacute would be a sharp tip, as in the acute leaf, but not quite as sharp, so it's less of an angle. Aristate is a kind of an apiculate tip, but very much extended, and that would be typical of a fig tree. Cuspidate is also like the apiculate leaf, but it has a very much broader angle. Kind of, it would be the example of the subacute versus acute leaf tip, but in this case with the apiculate tip. Truncate on the bottom left is, this is a tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera, which belongs to the magnolia family. It's got basically a flattened or level square tip. Obcordate, once again, the tip is the same as the obcordate shape. Retuse, which is kind of also rounded with a little bit of a dip in it. And then mucronate is just another version of the whole apiculate, aristate, cuspidate, and sort of group, but much narrower and more extended, but not as far as the aristate leaf. Leaf bases. A truncate base is a square base, as indicated there. An acute base is basically a sharp angle moving towards the base. A rounded base is self-explanatory. Cuneate is a leaf that narrows towards the base broadly. It doesn't form a sharp angle like the acute base. Auriculate leaves are leaves that kind of wrap around the stem a little bit, the leaf petiole where it joins the plant stem. It kind of forms little ears. It's not as easy to see in this image. It's not the best image for that, for illustrating that, but it forms little ears, hence auriculate. Reniform is the kidney shape leaf base. Oblique is basically means that the leaf base is unequal. So it doesn't have a symmetrical shape at the leaf base. Sagittate is once again the arrow-shaped leaf base. Hastate is like the sagittate leaf base, but it's more of a horizontal angle that the leaf base comes out to, kind of like a spear. And then of course the cordate, which we're familiar with, which is a heart-shaped leaf base. Leaf margins may be entire. They may be sinuate or undulate. In other words, they kind of wavy margins or sinuous margins. They form a sinuous line. Dentate is a toothed margin. It's kind of like a blunt tooth that you see is tooth-like projection on the leaf margin. Crenate is like the dentate tooth margin, but the teeth are more rounded. Lobed, this is typical of oaks and similar trees. They have these leaves which are deeply divided to form these lobes. It's kind of almost like a precursor of a compound leaf, which would have leaflets. Spiny, this would be typical of hollies, but also in this case Mahonia, a leatherleaf Mahonia, Mahonia belii, which is the Chinese or leatherleaf Mahonia pictured here. Serrate would be typical of almost forward projecting angular teeth, and that would be typical of stinging nettles, for example, or wood nettles. Double serrate is just where you have serrations upon serrations. Leaf venation. There are actually a number of different kinds of leaf venations, and it's quite complex. Arcuate basically means that all the leaf veins kind of move or terminate towards the tip, so they kind of angle upwards towards the tip. Cross-venulate is where secondary veins connect to one another, as in this leaf here. You can see it's got a nice pretty pattern. Dichotomous is where the leaf veins are branching into twos, so they branch into two, and then those two branch into two, etc. And this is the case in the ginkgo leaf. Reticulate is kind of like a netted appearance, so there's a network of veins that form kind of a net. Palmate looks like a spreading palm or spreading hand, and that's typical of this geranium leaf. Parallel is typical of strap-like leaves, which are typical of monocotyledonous plants. Pinnate is where you just have the lateral veins projecting from the main vein or midrib to the side, essentially, to form a kind of network like that. And then rotate is typical of a nasturtium. You can see it, the leaf veins are coming from a central point and they're rotating outward. Leaf attachment. Leaves might be attached normally, so the normal petiole or leaf stalk attaches to the stem. And plexicorl, where the leaf is sessile, it's directly attached to the stem, and the leaf base kind of curls around the base of the stem. Perfoliate is where the leaf base completely surrounds the stem, so it's like the stem has gone through the leaf. Sheathing is where you have a leaf forming a sheath at its base around the stem. Connate is similar to perfoliate, but it's usually where you have two leaves that form a base, but it's not around the stem, but it's not continuous. Paltate is where you have the leaf base, the stem coming into the leaf base, but not extending past the leaf. So in this case, the May apple, which incidentally has a scientific name, Podophyllum paltatum, referring to that feature. Leaf arrangement. Leaves may be alternately arranged. In other words, they are arranged so that they are not opposite each other. They alternate as they move up the stem. They may be whorled. In the second image, you can see there's a number of leaves coming out from the same point, which is referred to as whorled. Opposite is where you have leaves that come out opposite to one another, directly opposite, as the name suggests. And decussate is where you have opposite leaves that come out at right angles to one another. So the first pair comes out at one angle, and the second pair, which are also opposite, come out at an angle of 90 degrees to the first pair. So that would be referred to as decussate. Leaf modifications. Leaves might form spines. Spines are basically derived from modified leaves. The leaf has essentially developed into a sharp spine. Thorns and prickles are not derived from leaves but are often confused with spines. A thorn is a modified branch and develops from a shoot, and a prickle is derived from the epidermis of the plant. So the prickle would be a good example of that, would be members of the rose family, roses and various raspberries, dewberries, etc., blackberries. The thorns, which are derived from modified branches, a good example here is this plant in the image of the Carissa group of plants from the genus Carissa, which are called num-num bushes from Africa. Other leaf modifications can be highly complex. For example, in carnivorous plants, leaves have been modified to basically function in plant carnivory. In other words, trapping insects to supplement the nitrogen requirements of the plants. So the plant on the left is a pitcher plant. So the leaf has been modified into a kind of pitcher or container, which is very decorative lips or edges and a very, very, very smooth edge, which attracts a lot of insects, and the insects slip down and drop into the liquid in the base of the leaf and are digested. The sundew has these extended trichomes, which are sticky hairs which trap the insect, and then the leaf will fold over and digest the insect. And then you have the classic Venus flytrap, which is a modified leaf there, which basically folds over an insect once the hairs are triggered. And you can see the little hairs or trichomes extending from it that are triggered once the insect touches them. So it would once again close over the insect and then digest the insect. Usually once one of these leaves has been spent, in the case of the sundew or the Venus flytrap, it's tickets. That's the end of that leaf. Whereas with the pitcher plant, those leaves might function to digest a number of insects over time. This particular pitcher plant is actually from Australia. I think it's something like Phyllodes follicularis. It might be the scientific name. Anyway, there are two kinds of primary groups of plants, the monocotyledonous plants and the dicotyledonous plants. And that refers essentially to the development of the embryo, which will produce two tiny leaves, which will be the first or initial leaves. In the case of a monocot plant, it produces only one initial leaf, whereas in dicots they produce two leaves from, or leaflets from, the embryo or seed. And typical of the monocot leaves, they are strap-like with parallel venation. So all the plants with strap-like leaves are going to be monocots, including all the grasses, all the bulb plants such as lilies, etc., and amaryllis, and one can also include the palm trees. Whereas dicot leaves would include all other leaf shapes with branching venation. So they would be typical of pretty much any other leaf type that one would be familiar with. Then phyllodes and cladodes. Although leaves are the primary photosynthetic organs, this is not always the case. Okay, in the case of phyllodes, for example, in many of the acacia species or wattles from Australia, the leaf petiole or leaf stalk will flatten out to form a leaf-like structure, and it will take over the primary function of photosynthesis or as a photosynthetic organ. You can see in the diagram below, you can see the flattened leaf structure or the petiole, which is flattened, and then there's an extension with these tiny little compound leaves. Okay, those compound leaves are the real leaf parts. They don't always develop in plants that have phyllodes, but they can. So a phylode basically is a leaf stalk that is developed or taken over the function of photosynthesis. Cladodes, also known as cladophylls or phylloclades, are basically stems that have become modified to form a photosynthetic organ. In this case, we're looking at a prickly pear or a puntia species, and you can see the flowers being derived directly on top of these leaf-like pads. The leaf-like pads are actually stems that have flattened out to perform a photosynthetic function, and hence the flowers are growing from the tips of those pads because they are growing from the tips of the stem, essentially. Internal anatomy. We're going to just briefly go over internal anatomy. My primary focus in this video was to expose people to leaf morphology so they could use it for plant identification. But if we look at the typical leaf anatomy, you have an upper epidermis, which is covered by a waxy cuticle. So the epidermal cells are the outside cells that protect the leaf, and the waxy cuticle helps waterproof the leaf and provide a level of protection. Then you have a upper layer of chlorophyll-filled cells called the palisade, which functions primarily in photosynthesis, and a spongy mesophyll, which are cells which are more erratically spaced with a lot of interstitial air spaces, and they also function in photosynthesis, but to a lesser degree than the upper palisade layer. On the base of the leaf, usually but not always, you will have stoma or pores, which are the areas where there's the exchange of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water occurs. So the plant produces oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. That oxygen passes out of the stoma. It absorbs oxygen through the stoma for photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, through the stoma for photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide functions or is used in the process of photosynthesis using the sun's energy and water to produce carbohydrates. The opening to the pore or stoma is regulated by cells called guard cells. So these expand or contract to open or close the pore or stoma, allowing water vapor basically to go out during evapotranspiration or to prevent water loss, and also to allow for carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange. On the base of the leaf, you also have an epidermis and you also have a cuticle. So on both sides of the leaf blade, one would have a cuticle and an epidermis. Because the leaf is attached to the vascular system, of course, there'll be leaf veins, and the main vein of the leaf made up of a vascular bundle. The vascular bundle consists of a bundle sheath around the outside, which strengthens and protects the vascular tissue. And then you have the xylem pictured above the phloem. The xylem is basically the water transport system, which transports water and nutrients to the leaf. And the phloem is the transport system for the carbohydrates that are produced during photosynthesis. So that would transport carbohydrates produced by the leaf back down to the rest of the plant. On top of this diagram, you can see these long extensions called trichomes. Those are essentially the plant form of a hair. Trichomes have a lot of functions. They protect the leaf. Some are quite rough. They might have a lot of different shapes. They might be star-like, for example, or hooked, which trap insects. They protect the plant. They also create a certain level of humidity over the leaf, which in turn helps regulate the water content over the leaf and evapotranspiration. And some trichomes might be modified in the case of the sundew to form gland-like hairs which would trap insects in the case of carnivorous plants. So that's essentially the internal leaf anatomy. I'm not going to go too much into that because that wasn't the purpose really of this video, but it is a general outline nonetheless. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. It takes a lot of effort to make these videos, and it's really encouraging to get someone to like or subscribe the video. Here are my references. A lot of the images I used were Wiki Commons and my own personal images.